Hey everybody, so glad you're with us again. It is now September. We are on episode 1 of our new series. This is going to be a series on the Enneagram. And if you're new to us, my name is John Lemons and I'm the minister to young adults here at First Baptist Church in Huntsville, Alabama. I am joined by Sam Maxwell. He is the ministry resident to young adults. And I'm joined by Scott Day and Allie Day. Scott is our missions minister. Allie is his wife. And they are here to talk to us this week about, or actually this month, about the Enneagram. And so we're so excited to have them. Scott and Allie, I'm assuming this is like your first podcast ever.
Yes.
Yeah.
First official podcast ever.
Wow, this is
Congratulations. Welcome. It's our
We deserve a medal.
It's our 6th.
Wow.
And I understand we may get a special appearance from your cat at some point.
Yes.
Very possible.
Yeah, more than likely, it might not be an appearance. It might be like a technological destruction.
Yeah. So, well, welcome. I saw something on Twitter yesterday, I think, where a guy said, just checking in, is there anybody that hasn't started a podcast yet? And so we get to cross our names off that list. So that was actually, did you guys have like a COVID list when all this started, where you were like, all right, we're going to have all this time and we're going to do this, that, and the other thing?
Top of the list would have been not get COVID, and Scott happened to do that.
Yeah,
So.
Yes.
And
I
new
feel like I
list.
both got into and out of shape and sort of back into it within COVID as well.
It's
Yeah.
been a long time. Some fluctuation.
It's been a
Lots
long
of
time.
baking, no baking, lots more baking, things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Well, I'm a list maker, and I make lists just to have things not to cross off because I never get them done. But like, actually, start a podcast was on mine, and I was like, well, I guess we can do that. I mean, it only took like 5 months to get it started. So, but there we are. So, well, glad to have you guys on. This will be a really fun one. So let's talk about the Enneagram as we're there. So tell us a little bit about it for those who are listening. There may be people who, like me, until like a year ago, who'd heard of this thing, but I was like, I don't know what that is. Like, give me my good old Myers-Briggs or whatever. So what is the Enneagram? Where did it come from? Why is it a hot topic all of a sudden? Tell us all about that.
So the Enneagram is a personality assessment tool, similar to what you mentioned, Myers-Briggs and StrengthsFinder and DISC Profile, kind of all of those in one. So Enneagram comes from the Greek ennea, meaning 9, and gramma, meaning to write something down. So there are 9 different personality types in the Enneagram. It's similar to all of those other personality types. For us, it has given us new and better language that we didn't have before. So, nothing against those other personality testing tools. We've just found, at least me personally, have found the Enneagram to give me new and better language that I didn't have before.
Something that I would point out is that Scott said tool and not test. A lot of people think that the Enneagram is just a test that you can take. I actually would encourage you not to take that test while you're learning about the Enneagram. I think it's more helpful to hear all of the numbers and listen to them without trying to just find out what you are. I think it's better to discover for yourself rather than just be told a number. So tool is a great word there. And yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit different from the other ones too, because it's going to have movement. It's a more dynamic test, right? So in Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ, and that's what I am. And that's going to really talk about my characteristics. So the Enneagram is trying to move into the motivations, or what are those things that are causing you to do these actions. And then for each type, you're going to have traits of other types, and you can have movement into a more healthy atmosphere of that number and a less healthy atmosphere of that number too. So that's beneficial for me, is that it's not so static like Myers-Briggs.
So just to clarify, when Scott talks about movement, he's not talking about moving from number to number. He's talking about movement within your number. So you're not moving between personality types. You're the same one all the time, but it can look different depending on your circumstance or the people that are around you or things like that. And we will talk about those changes too.
that's one of the hard things I find about like other tests, like a Myers-Briggs or whatever, because you'll get this question and it'll be like, well, I mean, it depends on the scenario, right? It depends on the situation. So it seems like there's a little bit more allowance for fluidity, I guess, maybe. Is that a good word?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think that's hits the nail on the head.
Cool.
So you mentioned, Scott, that the name Enneagram is Greek. So it was the Enneagram kind of created by the Greeks, or just taken and run with by the Greeks, or kind of, is there any sort of interplay there?
Gosh, I don't know. It's said when you read some Enneagram texts, they'll talk about how they find their history all the way back to the patristic fathers in the 4th century, with them starting to discover different personality types and how those have relations within the Christian faith. The Enneagram really didn't get popular until the 60s with a South American guy named Chasgo. And so that's kind of more of its history. It's really gained popularity probably just in the last 10 or 15 years, especially with more evangelical churches. So I don't think it has any Greek leaning, but having a Greek name does make it sound much more professional.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like, how'd you all get involved with it, or kind of get your familiarity with it, or leading others through discovering more about themselves through using the Enneagram?
So my brother first discovered it within my family, and then my mom, and then my sister, and then me. But Baylor, where we both went to school for undergrad, they did a yearly Know Your Number workshop with Suzanne Stabile. I think potentially Richard Rohr came at one point in time, but I know Suzanne Stabile was there. And it was a 2-night thing that was like 4.5 hours long each night, and they went through each number for an hour. And I've gone to that workshop and then multiple other workshops. Suzanne Stabile is a pretty big name in the Enneagram, and she does a lot of ministry in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I've gone up and done workshops with her, and then also just some personal studying of my own, just to invest more of my time in knowing myself better, knowing other people better as well.
How I came into it like many other people, I heard Allie talking about it and had no idea what she was talking about, and all the language didn't really make sense. So
I tell the truth about what happened.
Go for it.
It would make for a good show.
Enneagram. And something that I really love about the Enneagram is that it gives you a lot of really good language to describe yourself to other people or explain yourself to other people. And so when Scott and I were first talking or hanging out, I wanted to explain myself better to him so he would know me better. And I used a lot of the Enneagram language. I also thought it would be helpful if he knew the Enneagram so that we could kind of talk about that and I could learn better about him via the Enneagram. He was very opposed to it at first.
Oh, 100%.
Which is how most things go when I introduce them to him, and then later he finds them and he's like, I found this. And it's like, I told you about that like 3 months ago.
That is 100% true.
So, yes. So then eventually he came around and he was like, oh, people are doing this, not just Allie. So then he started doing it too.
Yeah. So Allie was my first introduction. And then when I started Truett, we have these community groups, and so our community group was focused around the Enneagram. So that's really the first time I really got in depth into it and said, okay, this actually makes sense. This gives me some new language and new insights, not only into Allie, but into myself. So yeah, 100% stole it from Allie after I first made fun of her for it.
Nice.
So that's how a marriage works.
Well, you talked about, Allie, you talked about Allie, you talked about how it gave you language to explain kind of where you were coming from. But I've also heard you talk about ways not to use the Enneagram, and ways like, for instance, don't use it kind of as an excuse. Don't use it as a way to label other people. So talk to us a little bit more about that as we kind of intro what this is and what we're going to be doing. What are some sort of warnings for people as they begin exploring this on ways not to use this tool?
Yeah, so I think the Enneagram at its worst becomes a party game. People will say cocktail talk, things like that, where people are just using it to kind of say like, oh, I think you're this number, or I think you're this number. Or like there's a lot of funny memes about different numbers, and like that's very fun to laugh at, but that's not really the purpose of the Enneagram, and I think kind of distorts its purpose. Especially with other people, if they don't know what the Enneagram is, talking about it in front of someone who doesn't know what that is, it has a lot of insider-outsider language. So saying, I'm a 3 and he's a 4 or whatever, people aren't going to know what you're talking about. So I think the Enneagram gives you really helpful language to explain yourself without even needing to use the numbers for people who don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. But for those that do, it's a helpful tool to use. I think it's very unwise to label other people using this tool. The Enneagram is supposed to not put people in a box, but talk about the box that they're already in. And I think that it can create a very negative atmosphere around the Enneagram when you're typing people, talking maybe about the negative effects of their number, things like that. But it's really meant to be a self-discovery tool. Like I said, taking the test kind of steals away from that, but labeling someone else also steals away from that too.
Awesome. Scott, anything to add? Or Sam?
Yeah,
that'll
great.
All right, so
yeah,
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I think it comes down. These are good tools for life, right?
Mhm.
About not stereotyping and putting people in a box. I think it's really important to not make the Enneagram more than what it is. And I think some individuals have done that really poorly, where this becomes the end all be all. And
Mhm.
to, be a new hipster Christian is to know the Enneagram really well. And I think it's really important that Allie refers to it as a tool, because that's what it is. And some tools are going to work really well for some people like us. And for some people, this isn't going to work well at all. And some other personality typing or some other spiritual formation element is going to be their bread and butter. So
I would also add that the Enneagram, its purpose is personal transformation. And so information is not the same thing as transformation.
Mm.
So if you're using the Enneagram as a tool just to gain knowledge and just to gain information and say, I know all these things about the Enneagram, that's really not what it's for. It's for you to use for personal transformation, and then also to learn how to better extend grace to other people.
That's awesome.
It's really interesting, kind of some of the things that you were saying while I was doing some reading in preparation, that there have been, as you mentioned, I think, Scott, you mentioned it, that there have been a lot of different tools for a long time. And Hippocrates, I think that's how you pronounce it, or that's where you get the Hippocratic Oath from, kind of defined human personalities or motivations for personalities down into 4 humors. Basically, based on how much of what color of fluid you had in your body was a predictor for how you would live or how you would make your way through life. And it seemed really confining. And at least how you talk about Enneagram, it's less of like a predictor and more of a, like, let's figure out what causes you or what makes you lean in a particular direction based on your environment around you, rather than a predictor for action.
yeah, that's really important. The Enneagram, like we mentioned, is going to be showing you your motivations behind your actions. So also, at its worst, people can use it as an excuse for their behavior, right? So
Right.
if I'm being really vain, I can just say, well, it's just me being a 3. And that will make more sense when we explain 3s. But, the Enneagram is not an excuse for behavior, but hopefully it will give you some more insight into why you were doing that. And then you can have a little bit more work on yourself. I mean, that's the end goal. But
So a quote that I love from Susan Subiel says, you can't change how you see, just what you do with how you see.
Mm.
And so the Enneagram helps you kind of have some self-awareness for how
Right.
you're seeing the world, perceiving situations, perceiving other people, and take a moment to non-judgmentally see that in yourself, and then reevaluate how you might respond, or how you are maybe responding to something. And then you can say, I'm doing this because I am this way.
Mhm.
And it's helpful for you to know that and for other people to know that too.
Right.
So
Yeah, it helps. So it helps you understand why you tend to react in certain ways in certain situations, not as an excuse, but as a way to maybe identify it and then be able to work on it, because you can't, if you have a leak in your house, you can't fix your leak unless you know where the leak's coming from, I guess. So sort of.
what I love that this is titled Know Thyself, because, right, we're putting onus on, if we know ourselves better,
Yeah.
we're going to innately be able to find more spiritual disciplines and formational elements that are going to fit us. And hopefully we're going to be uncovering something of the image of God within us.
Right.
So these two things of knowing ourselves and knowing our God and knowing God are intricately intertwined.
Yeah.
And this is a tool to do that, right? So this is why
Absolutely.
we love it.
Yeah,
At
the
least I love
know
it.
thyself quote actually comes from Socrates. So this idea of just getting in tune with sort of the inner parts of you, the mind, the soul, the heart of who you are, is an idea that goes all the way back to the earliest days of philosophy. Also, it goes back to the earliest days of the church. There are plenty of church fathers. I talked about this last week, that have quotes where they say something to the effect of, the more you understand yourself and know yourself, the more you can understand and know God and who he is and how he built you. So I think it is helpful in that way. So before we go there, it is controversial. Tell us why that is, and is it like satanic or whatever? Because that's kind of like the thing you hear is
Sure.
that, like, or anytime you really get into, I think, psychology, it tends to scare some people, and particularly the field of personality and things like that. So why is it not a danger or a threat there, or where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, the first thing that you're going to pull up when you go to Google Images is this picture that looks like a pentagram, right? So if I've never seen this before, I, of course, am going to be turned off. I think it's our natural human reaction to demonize things that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And people that we don't understand. All right, so my first reaction, if there's someone gosh, who's on the street asking for money, my first reaction is probably not going to be to extend them grace and to see myself in their position. It's probably going to be cast them out.
And we'll
So,
figure out why that is. But
yeah,
I was gonna say maybe not your first reaction, your human reaction.
well, speak for yourself.
maybe
yeah.
cut that out.
we're all that way. So
Yeah, it's so easy to demonize things that don't fit our perfect bubbles, and yeah, any personality tool, isn't based out of a scripture book. It's not based off of. There's not a certain theological text says that you need to look at the Enneagram. It's a holy endeavor.
Mhm.
But hopefully, we're using something in society that can better train and work into our faith.
Mhm.
That's how I look at it. No, it's not satanic. It's really easy to demonize things that we don't understand and we don't like.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's a tool. It's a tool. Myers-Briggs is a tool. It's not satanic. It doesn't have this underbelly that we're going to go, sacrifice something after we talk about your number. You can. I mean, I'm not going to be a part of it, but
Well, and
Yeah.
also to say, if you want to go and look up things and try to find the evils within them, you probably can Google search and find something along those lines. And, the Enneagram isn't for everybody. We're not trying to say that this is gospel, but it's just something that we found helpful for ourselves. And so, some people don't like it, and that's totally okay. But it is not something that I think is satanic or anything like that. I think that it's very biblical if you're using it as a tool to guide you to be more of who God created you to be. There's a lot about it that can lead you back to God, not away from Him. So
our goal too is when we start talking about individual numbers, like we're going to intentionally give some type of spiritual element towards this. So what if I'm a personality type number 1, what is some type of biblical passage or topic or spiritual element, some formational element that is going to be beneficial for this personality type? So we're going to try to be intentional when we're talking and teaching this to make this as overtly Christian as we can.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'll share an article that I read in our show notes of a pastor in North Carolina who was talking about the Enneagram, and he said it's a great tool. Yes, people can take anything and use it, in ways that aren't beneficial or ways that aren't good. That doesn't mean the thing in and of itself is not beneficial or good. And I think the idea of, um, obviously there's a long tradition of meditative practices, a long tradition of really getting away from distraction and things like that in the church. Saint Ignatius, I think, was the first one to even really start the idea of having regular retreats where you can get away and focus on things. And I think this is sort of a branch of that. And anytime where you dive into psychology or just kind of what makes us the way that we are, I think is sort of a branch of that. And it goes back to, like I said, a long line all the way back to the church fathers. And I think that's something we as Christians can do that is beneficial to us. I don't think it should be threatening, even if it is mysterious. And the way I look at psychology, it can certainly be helpful. I'm a big proponent of counseling services. We talked last week about ways to do that here in Huntsville, and places to go. I'm on the board at the Vine. I think we all the more we can get in touch with ourselves and our motivations and things that are so intrinsic that we may not miss unless we do that deep digging, I think the more helpful it makes us, and the more helpful it is to our relationship with God. I equate it a lot of times like to weather. I mean, at some point in time, we went from everybody thinking weather happened the way it did because of God or because of the gods to understanding that there's a science behind it. And that doesn't mean that God's not behind it. Like, God's behind science, right? So that doesn't make the study of weather evil. It just means like, oh, we understand a little bit more about this, and we can understand and maybe even now begin to predict things or see when things develop. And I think psychology is sort of a similar, or personality tools are a similar kind of aspect of that, where we use them, and it yes, they're mysterious, but it doesn't mean that God's not a part of that process or God's not behind that process. But we can use those in order to understand things better and understand ourselves better and make predictions or understand patterns and things like that. So that's the way I look at it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think
oh, sorry.
yeah, you're right. I was just going to say, I think no matter what area of science or exploration you get into, right, there are going to be places where people want to kind of transcend their borders of their study. And so I think there is the possibility for that. But as thinking beings, right, God gave us the ability to think through things. And so we could say, like, hey, maybe this isn't edifying to God, but maybe these things are still edifying to God, right? Kind of the example you gave, John, like there was once upon a time that people thought, well, Earth is at the center of the universe because God made us the center of the universe. And somehow, if the sun was now the center of the universe, was God not still edified? Like, or the solar system, not the universe. Like science is still helpful to help you understand something. It doesn't take away from God, but maybe it just helps you better understand God's creation. I think it was Thomas Copernicus said that, doing science is just thinking God's thoughts after him. So as a tool, right, it's almost like, oh, let's better understand God's creation and how we can interact with one another and understand one another better to live in harmony together.
I think also for Christians, something about the Enneagram that might be bothersome is that it's very focused on discovering yourself. And I think that for some people that feels very egocentric or like you're putting yourself on a pedestal. But I will say that something I think about the Enneagram is that when you do start to discover your number, it is one of the most, what am I going to say? It brings a lot of humility. It is not like we're saying, I am so great because of this, 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 and this. That's my number is. It's actually a lot of the negative parts of your number. And those are things that are hard to hear sometimes, but are things that we need to hear. And so I think that there's a big part of the Enneagram that you miss out on if you think that it's just this personality test where you're going to focus on yourself and, not these other things. But a lot of it is going to bring a lot of humility for you. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point too, because it makes me think if I talk with, couples that are, seeking, your cat is chiming in.
Yes, sorry. She has a lot of thoughts on this topic.
She totally agrees.
I'll talk with couples that are, seeking marriage counseling or whatever. And so I go through this program with them. But one of the things I tell them, because a part of it is a personality profile, and almost, I would say more than 50% of the time, they will say or they will worry, are we incompatible or whatever. Everybody always worries about that when they do some sort of personality profile or tool. And I always tell them there's really no such thing as incompatible types. It's really what makes you incompatible is not understanding yourself and not understanding your motivations and not understanding your partner's motivations and kind of who they are intrinsically. And so I think the more you can dive into that, anybody can be compatible as long as you understand why you are the way you are and understand sort of what your flaws are, and hopefully find a way to be a little bit more humble about it so that you understand your shortcomings or you understand the way you come across, and that way it allows you to relate better, to communicate better, all those sorts of things ideally. No, we're all works in progress on that, I'm sure, but one thing I do, I think as well, I think you mentioned this before, or I've heard you mention it before, there's no real direct correlation. So it's not like everybody who, I'm an INFJ or P, it depends on the day, but it's not like all INFJs are Enneagram number whatever. And so I think that's a clear distinction we should make, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an INTJ as well. And Scott, you said you're an INTJ, but we are two completely different numbers in the Enneagram.
Yeah,
that's right.
So that's it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
There are probably correlations, and I'm sure that if you went and looked, there are tendencies for this, Myers-Briggs type to be this Enneagram number, but it's not like they're the same because they're rooted in different things. So, like they were saying, Sam and Scott have the same Myers-Briggs, and they might look similar doing something, or might have similar behaviors at work or whatever, but their motivation behind those things might be different. And so I think it's just a lot deeper of a exploration for your personality rather than just these are things that I do, and so this is who I am.
Yeah. Well, as we let's get back into what we were talking a few minutes ago. We were talking a little bit about understanding ourselves and growth and using that for spiritual growth. So let's talk a little bit more about that. How have you guys seen this work towards that end, or how has it worked for you in that sense, in understanding one another or understanding how you relate to God better? As we complete this, or as we go through this together, what should we be telling people to look out for, or what should their ambition be when they get to the end of this time together?
I think one, if this is your first time with the Enneagram, is simply to find out which of the 9 personalities that you are. Like, that's the starting place. And then once you understand your number, I think then it's doing the dirty work of uncovering all of the ugly sides of it that we want to hide. So we'll talk each week about 3 different numbers. So we'll break it up into triads. One of the number is going to externalize something, one is going to internalize, and one's going to avoid it. So this will make a lot more sense when we talk about 3s, but my number is a 3, and I'm in the feeling triad. So one of these numbers is going to externalize their feelings. One number, which is Allie's number, is going to internalize their feelings, so they're going to feel their own instead of feeling others. And my number is going to avoid feelings, or they don't have the capacity to adequately talk about their feelings. So for me, it gives me a groundwork that I can give myself grace, that I'm not just a twisted, heartless person, but this is actually something that I need to work on to be better at. And hopefully it's going to get me empathy and grace to Allie as well, to understand that, hey, we're not the same personality. And so we're also not entirely different. We like to call each other polar complements. So we see ourselves being able to work in harmony once we've done some of our own personal work. So yeah.
I think it's funny that you brought up incompatibility because if you're looking at the Enneagram and thinking of numbers that might be incompatible, you would find our numbers.
Oh, 100%.
Because I am all feelings all of the time. That's how I sense the world, is through my feelings. And so I talk about feelings. I want to know what you're feeling. I want to know all the feelings. I have lots of feelings, all of those things. And Scott's like, feelings? No. Like,
use it in a sentence, please.
Let's back away from the feelings. And so had I not known the Enneagram, or had we not learned this together, that would be really difficult for us to talk about or give grace to. But now that we know this and can talk about it with each other, it's really helpful for me to know, like, he is not heartless. He does not have feelings.
Oh, thank you.
That's something that it's really important not to take someone's number and throw it at them.
Mm.
So it's really important for me not to say, well, like, you're a 3, so like you would understand because you don't have feelings. Like, that's a really inappropriate use of the Enneagram. But it's helpful for me to know that he can only talk about feelings for so much time, because that's not the same place that I'm in, that he's in, that I'm in. So that's something that's, I think, really helpful about the Enneagram. Something else too, when you're first learning it, yes, you need to find your number. But the Enneagram first for you is going to bring up self-awareness. So not everyone's a super introspective person. And sometimes it's really helpful to all of a sudden realize, like, hey, that's me. I do all of those things. And the more that you start to read about yourself, the more you'll start to be aware of it in your life. When you do need space from feelings, and then you kind of know why. It allows you to give yourself grace for that. And then also, as you continue learning and maybe having friends who know the Enneagram, or, I said don't type other people, but that means don't type them out loud to them. Sometimes you might know what someone else's number is. And it's helpful to know, like, I don't have a great relationship with this person, and our personalities are really different, but it allows me to know, like, where you're coming from. And I can give grace to that because I can understand where you're coming from, even though it's a very different place than what I'm coming from.
I think that's really important. Like, so the first thing is that it's given us language. So, Allie, when she comes home, she wants to share about her day and how the emotional range has affected her. And so I want to fix things. So if she has a problem, my first sentence to her is, do you want me to feel it or to fix it? And so it's given us new language that's been really helpful. But I think too, trying to tie it back into spiritual development. So my number is a 3. 3s are known as the achievers. Like, they love to work. They're workaholics until they get to the point where they're so burnt out that they just totally check out. So like, today was a super crazy day. And when I come home, I just want to be on my back patio by myself, and I want nothing to do with anyone else. So I just kind of in a vegetable state. So
instead of letting that hurt my feelings, because I want us to be like, oh, we're going to hang out when I go to work. Like, we're going to be friends because this is what we do, because we're married. I don't have to have hurt feelings that he wants to be alone, because it's not about me at all. Mm-hmm. This is just about him and how he's processing his day.
Right.
Well, and two, just for me personally, it makes me acutely aware that stress and rest and Sabbath have to be really important for my spirituality.
Right.
Because if I work really hard all week long to the point where I'm burnt out and I don't have an adequate Friday or Saturday to have a Sabbath, then I'm not going to be a good minister on Sunday. I'm not going to be able to have the capacity to connect to someone else.
Right.
So just the simple action of knowing my triggers and being able to say, I need to look at my schedule at the beginning of the week so I'm not pushing myself. That when Thursday I'm so burnt out that I can't give Allie or anyone else any energy. That's not fair to her or to me.
So something else as you go deeper into the Enneagram, because there are layers and layers and layers of the Enneagram. This is something that I've been studying for 6 years, and there is so much that I don't know. So there's just a lot that you can learn about the Enneagram. But one of the things that we'll get into more as we get into the numbers is that each number has arrows, and they go in directions. We talked about movement. One of those movements is between stress and security. And so there's parts of other numbers that you go to either in a stressful circumstance or a stressful life stage, or when you're feeling really secure. And so something that I think is helpful is that those numbers are good for you because you can't take care of yourself without that number that you go to in stress. It brings a component of self-care that you don't possess all the time. And then the other number is what allows you to experience holistic healing and become more of who you're supposed to be. So there are things about the Enneagram that they call it the work of the Enneagram. This isn't just a thing that you read, but it's a tool that you use to, hello Juniper, that you use to better yourself and to give yourself grace in those moments, and then to work harder at being a more holistic version of who you are. Because like we said before, the Enneagram is not a crutch. It's not so that I can say, this is my number, this is just how I am, deal with it. You know, you're going to say your number and you're going to see the world how you see the world, and that's not changing, but you can change your behavior. It's not going to change your motivation, but you can change your behavior. And so there's a lot of things that you can do once you've learned the Enneagram. It's not just knowledge, it's transformation.
For myself, kind of talking about giving yourself grace just as a little piece, and I can talk more about my personality when we get to it, but just the freedom I think that came along with it, just thinking for a long time, like, what is wrong with me? Why do I do these things? Like, am I broken? Is there something that's just not right with me? Was I scarred as a child because I didn't have enough Play-Doh or something that makes me this way? And the reality is, no, that's just the way like my personality functions, and that's just the way I am. And it's not that it's in itself bad, but it's just something that I have to be more intentional to work through or be mindful of when I start becoming concerned or stressed or whatever else.
This is a great discussion, and I think a great place to close. Plus, my cat is in the room with me, and I think about to start going crazy too. So we're doing this at night, all from home. So if you're listening, so that's where the cats are coming from. They're not running around at the office. I know, Allie, you've talked about, or I think you both did when I heard you talking about this before. Your recommendation for people is to really hear kind of what all 9 of the types are about, and then I've heard you say before, it's just kind of obvious which one you are. So you don't really need a test, or it might be like, oh, there's 1 or 2 that you resonate with. And then you really encourage people to explore that further. Am I right? So
yeah, I definitely think that it's helpful to, even if you think you know your number coming into this, but you don't know a lot about the Enneagram, I would just say, set that aside. Set it aside and listen to all of the numbers and really hear them all for what they are. But yes, for most people, not for everybody, you're going to kind of feel exposed when you hear your number. I was not listening to a podcast or watching a video. I was in a room full of people, and I felt like there was a spotlight on my chair because all of a sudden it was like, this is my inner being that everyone's hearing about. And so it can feel really exposing and, like I said, kind of humiliating at times, but it's bringing out some of those hard things to see in yourself, and then giving you grace to work with those things. So yeah, I think it's helpful to set aside numbers or not to take a test, but then just to listen to all of them. And if you don't feel like you heard your number, maybe continue your exploration of all of them by reading a book. Or if you think maybe between 2, you can take a test. The only reason that I really don't encourage that is it's not really self-discovery. And also you can mistype. So I said this at our Enneagram class, whenever that was before COVID, that a lot of women in the South will test as 2s because culturally, that is what is expected of them. And so there's a lot of personality traits about 2s that are Southern women stereotypes. And so people will mistype because that's what they were raised to do. So sometimes when you're answering those questions, just because you do it doesn't mean that's your motivation for doing it. And it can be really hard to separate those things. So I think listening fully to each number, and we might even give a little blurb at some point in time of what all the numbers are. And I still would say don't jump with 1 or 2 of them because you might surprise yourself in what you end up being.
That's awesome. Well, I'm looking so forward to the next 3 weeks of this. And just to clarify, we're going to do three numbers each week. They're called triads. We'll get into more about what that is about. But so excited to be doing this with you guys, and really thankful of you to be taking your time to do this with us. And as we close, I just want to tell everybody thanks for listening. Go ahead, if you're on iTunes, give us a 5-star review. We actually have 8 now. Like 2 weeks ago, we had 2, and we discovered it wasn't any of us. And then I went and gave us a 5-star review. I don't know if Sam did. So, but anyway, we're up to 8. So
3.5.
Yeah, I didn't. That seems a little self-serving.
nice. Well, somebody is out there doing it. So
Seems very Enneagram 3, just to say that.
Didn't you guys get kicked out of some European country?
Okay,
Did I
Sorry,
get that right?
Denmark.
So yes, we did a song. We were putting a song. We should close this with a song from Scott, by the way, because our last one we closed with a song from Charlie. But so yeah,
That's a little uneven, just saying.
Yeah, I don't appreciate that.
So yeah, all right. So 2 interesting facts here. One, it recognized one of the songs, the melody YouTube did, and so it restricted it. And when I went and checked it, it said restricted in some territories, and I was like, well, where's it restricted? Because I was thinking in Huntsville, right? And it was like in Denmark, and I was like, so okay.
Who
then-
in Denmark is listening to
But
this?
then I looked at our analytics for our podcast, and because it shows me just where it's being downloaded, like what countries or states or whatever. We have 1 download on our podcast in Sweden, which is a neighboring country of Denmark. So I think somebody like crossed the border and downloaded our show back. So it's pretty wild. So, but anyways, yeah, thanks everybody for listening, for supporting the show, and talking about it, sharing it, that kind of thing. Do want to tell you, check the show notes. We always will have resources in there. And as we go on, I'll ask for resources from Scott and Allie, and we'll share those in their books or other podcasts to listen to about the Enneagram, that kind of thing. Also want to remind you, if you're in Huntsville, we're with First Baptist Church. So go to fbchsv.org/youngadults. We just came out with a new email this week with everything that we've got coming up for the month. We'd love you to check that out. And of course, we're on all the major social channels: Facebook, Instagram, now iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. So check us out on all those places, and look forward to being with you guys again next week. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
See you then.
See you.